let's look at one of these real world application or examples of having a procurement control. So again, procurement control is a critical function in project management, ensuring that the contracts are executed as planned, and without proper monitoring, the project risks in terms of cost overruns or schedule delays and compliance issues. So the following case study will explore how large-scale project can successfully be managed, let's say managing the procurement and controlling it in a more efficient way, and what are the lessons can be applied to other industries. To start with our case study, where there is a large-scale infrastructure project in an industry of construction and infrastructure development, we have, let's say, a comprehensive procurement strategy to meet this infrastructure project, which requires to have this comprehensive procurement strategy due its scale and complexity. And also by managing multiple vendors across different locations pose a challenge in terms of contract compliance, supplier performance, and risk mitigation. So to ensure the procurement control mechanism were implemented at very stage, we're we're gonna say go through how to identify, let's say, the risks, how to deal with these contracts, how to, let's say, to put a mitigation plan. So again, in our case here, we have an industry of construction, and the scope here of let's say development of highway network across multiple regions. And the vendors has involved the number of vendors here. We have over 50 international suppliers to supply the materials, logistics, and labor. So you can think of how huge project is by building a highway network across multiple regions, over 50 international suppliers, and the budget here were $2 billion with a stringent cost control and quality standards. And some of these challenges, which we already have talked about, including the supply disruptions, cost fluctuations, and contract compliance risks. So let's go the next step and understand what are the key performance or the key procurement monitoring strategies that we can use. First, here we can use the first strategy by having vendor performance tracking. And the purpose of, let's say, having a vendor performance tracking is to ensure the suppliers meet KPIs and SLAs. And how we can apply it in our case study, and to apply it is by we can, let's say, having a monthly performance evaluation of these suppliers, seeing all of these 50 suppliers or 50 vendors. You can provide, let's say, a checklist or let's say an evaluation metrics or evaluation criteria to evaluate all of these, let's say, vendors KPIs with their compliance with whatever SLAs that were identified. The next strategy here we can also follow is having a contract compliance audit. And the purpose of having contract compliance audit is to verify the adherence to the procurement agreements. And to apply that in our case study, we can have a regular legal and financial audits by, let's say, monthly or quarterly. But this will ensure that you have, let's say, a control over these procurement agreements. And the third strategy we can follow here is risk-based procurement monitoring. And risk-based procurement monitoring strategy is to identify and mitigate supplier risks. And how to, let's say, apply that in real world in our application or in our case study, it's by having an early detection of any supply chain disruptions. The next strategy we're gonna talk here we can implement is by having an automated procurement system. An automated procurement system, it can be used to improve the tracking and reporting. In our case, we can apply it by having an AI-based contract tracking tools used. The final strategy also we can utilize here by having a cost control mechanism to prevent any cost overruns and fraud. And to implement that in our case study is by implementing a real-time financial, let's say, forecasting and monitoring, let's say, dashboards. So again, all of these strategies that we already have discussed and we recommended, it's to ensure the effective procurement control. So the project have leveraged, or we can leverage all of these multiple strategies, including the vendor performance tracking, the compliance audits, and cost control mechanism. So these measures, it can help you identify and resolve the issue early, ensuring a smooth procurement operations. The procurement risk management large-scale project. So procurement control involves actively identifying and mitigating the risks, and that could affect the project delivery. In our project, it has implemented a diverse sourcing strategies and contract reviews and, let's say, cost adjustment mechanism to maintain the procurement stability. And let's look into more in depth about these procurement risks that were identified during our case when we were building let's say, the network across the multiple region project dealing with 50 international suppliers. So to start with, let's say the risks were identified, including the supplier reliability issues, which might be a reason for delay in material delivery. We also have identified one of these risks in terms of cost fluctuations because of the currency exchange rate that impact the procurement costs. We also have this risk where legal compliance risks with the contractual dispute and compliance. One of these risks that we identify is the supply chain disruptions because of the global shortages affecting the materials availability. And the risk mitigation strategies were implemented to overcome these or to mitigate these risks is by having a multi-vendor strategy, by engaging multiple suppliers to prevent any dependency on a single vendor. And to deal with cost fluctuation risk is that we have price adjustment clauses. So our mitigation here is to have price adjustment clauses where the contracts have or included an escalation clauses for currency fluctuations. And the fourth mitigation strategy to deal with the legal and compliance risks is by having let's say, regular contract performance review, like monthly assessment to ensure the adherence to the procurement terms and conditions. And to deal with the fourth risk that I mentioned when we are dealing with a supply chain disruptions is by alternative sourcing plans to have a backup suppliers, let's say, to manage these disruptions. The lesson learned from this project that we were talking about in terms of applying the best practices, best risk management when doing a large scale procurement control. The first lesson here is continuous vendor evaluation improves the performance. When we talked about having a regular audits and KPIs, which has helped to identify the high performing vendors. The second lesson we can learn from this, let's say, project is by having a risk based procurement control enhances the resilience. When we have a structured risk assessment process, which prevented the procurement disruptions. And the third lesson we have learned here is to have a digital procurement tools to increase the efficiency. When we have let's say implemented or automated the systems that improve the contract tracking and cost forecasting. And the fourth, let's say, lessons learned here is strong communication with the vendors prevent disputes, and by having a frequent supplier meetings to ensure the alignment with the project objectives. So this case study has highlighted the best practices in procurement control, including vendor evaluation, risk-based monitoring, and digital procurement solution. By following these principles, the organizations can enhances the efficiency and prevent procurement failures. Let's look at some of other best practices in procurement and the contract control. The first best practice here we have is to implement robust vendor selection criteria by using a pre-qualification assessment and performance history checks. Next, you can, let's say, conduct a regular compliance audit to ensure the suppliers meet the contractual obligations and industry regulations. The next best practice here in procurement control is to leverage data analytics for procurement monitoring by using, for example, trend analysis to identify procurement risk early, for example. And the next best practice I encourage is to integrate contract management software to improve the visibility of the contract performance and modifications. Finally, you need to ensure a clear communication with the stakeholders to maintain the transparency in procurement decisions and to keep them aligned with the project goals. So these best practices in procurement control enhances the vendor accountability and optimize the costs and mitigate the procurement risks. By implementing these risks or these strategies, it ensures the successful procurement operation across industries. We already have talked on about the role of technology in procurement control, the automated systems, the AI-driven, the blockchain to enhance the transparency and prevention, the e-procurement and e-signature platform, the data analytics to have a predictive analytics for let's say to predict any issues in procurement. So in our case study, here where the impact were measured in terms of procurement control results. So before, let's say in terms of a KPI where the supplier compliance rate, so before having a control measure and before we have implemented all of these best practices and our strategies, the score here was only 78%. After control measures and after employing and applying all of these measures and regularly reviewing the contracts and evaluating the suppliers adherence these contracts and informing all of the stakeholders and putting all of these risk mitigation strategies. So after implementing all of these changes we have achieved 90% in terms of supplier compliance. The next KPI here we have improved is the procurement cost overruns. Before applying all of these changes, the cost overruns here were 15%. And after employing and implementing all of these strategies we've talked about, we have reduced that to 5% in terms of cost overruns. When it comes to on-time, let's say vendor deliveries and let's say compliance with the time constraint, before implementing all of these, let's say, strategies, we were doing only 65% in terms of compliance with the vendor deliveries. But after implementing all of these strategies, we have achieved 90%. In terms of the procurement dispute, we had before implementing all of these strategies, we had 12 per year, so 12 procurement disputes 1 year. And after implementing all of these strategies, we have approved, let's say, our procurement dispute and we have reduced it into 3 per year. Again, to summarize all of these challenges that we have faced when dealing with this case study in terms of procurement control and we look into their solution. So we talked about the unreliable vendors and the solution were implemented by multi-vendor sourcing strategy. We looked at the cost fluctuations and we implemented a dynamic pricing contract with escalation clauses. We looked at one of these challenges where the contract compliance issue, where we say that we have implemented a frequent and regular audits and automated tracking tools. Lastly, we had this or faced this issue where there is a slow procurement processes and we implemented a digital procurement workflow integration to enhance these processes. So the procurement control present all of these changes or challenges, including the vendor reliability and cost fluctuations, the contract compliance issues, and these slow procurement processes. By implementing a structured solution, it has ensures the smooth procurement execution. And to summarize our final session on talking about procurement, we talked about the vendor performance importance tracking and contract audits, which is crucial part of the procurement control and monitoring. We also looked at the procurement risks in our case study, where it should be identified and mitigated early by setting all of these risks. And we already have looked at what were the implemented mitigation strategies to handle these risks. We also talked about implementing these digital or utilizing these digital tools to enhance the procurement efficiency and compliance. Finally, we talked about how clear communication and structured contract management improves the outcomes of your procurement control strategy.